Okay, we may as well get started. As you can probably read, my name is Rob Manger. I'm the Senior Test Analyst at SEEK. The subject I'll be talking about follows quite nicely on from what Mark Peterson was talking about. It's all about Agile testing. And more importantly for us, the transition to Agile testing. So just setting the context, we had the dark days. So before the beginning of 2011, we were a Waterfall development shop. And what you may not realise about SEEK is it's not an IT company, it's actually a marketing and advertising company. So very different mindset, and it just happens to be a website. So it kind of became a very us versus them mentality between the IT department and the business or the client, which is obviously not a very comfortable place or environment to work in. So I won't dwell too much on that because I have psychological scars about it. But what I will cover today is kind of how some of the processes we went through, covering the three main areas. The people, so talking about the roles and responsibilities changes from a testing role, but not just from testing, but other people's perceptions of testing. And talking about the change in attitudes, so again testing with the rest of the IT department and the rest of the company as well. I'm not going to dwell too much on tools because everyone has their own tool set and their own opinions and stuff. The only thing I'll dwell on is some of the tools we're using, but more importantly how we're using them, how they support the process that we're implementing. But the real crux of this presentation is around the process. So lots of screenshots of what we're doing, and again, this isn't really an interactive session, but please feel free to shout out questions or hopefully it'll kind of provoke some thoughts, we could do something like this as well. So without further ado, talking about the people, the title says changing roles and responsibilities. Now, one of the Agile fallacies is we don't need testers. Has anyone ever heard that phrase before? Yes?
I've said it.
Do you believe it? Get out, thank you. I really can't tell you how much this phrase frustrates me. I could tell you, but I'm not allowed to use that sort of language yet. But more than frustration, it actually confuses me. If we're heading toward, or if we're trying to increase speed to market, and try and do things better, surely we need more testing, not less testing. So I disagree with that. But there is kind of a question around what type of testers we need. It's not that we don't need any testers, we need better testers, and kind of talking about the change in role. Now, if you've ever been to Agile Australia or Stands or any, you might have seen a presentation by a guy called Craig Smith from Suncorp, using one of his images with permission, of course, because it really depicts the shift in roles that's necessary, I think, for a successful Agile team. And the best thing about this image is that it's not just the testers that need to change. The developers need to come out of their dark caves and get involved more in not just unit testing, but helping out to increase the efficiency of the functional automation and to aid in even the manual testing and building test harnesses, etc. The business analysts, need to get more involved. It's not just about writing requirements and then handing it off. It's more about verification and the business acceptance testing and stuff like that. And then the tester's role. The testers really need to become more technical, and it's not just a monkey see, monkey do kind of environment where you follow a script and, that's not right, raise a vote. Using your head a little bit more. The only thing that I'd add to this side is there should be an arrow going the other way on the tester column as well, because the testers are generally the ones that know and have a high level view of the environment, so we generally get involved in the requirements definition as well. Another image of Craig's, and then we'll move on to all the original stuff. People talk about cross-skilling or developers with testing skills or stuff like that. This image really depicts the difference between the role. There is a lot of overlap, and the more we cross-skill, the better testing you can do. But there is still a very distinct mindset between not just thank you, but also the business analysts as well. There's still very distinct roles, but they really work well together, and they need to work well together. And the point of this slide is that not just testing, but quality is a group responsibility. Everyone owns testing, regardless of who's actually executing. So that's enough about the people. Talking very quickly about the tools. Another Agile fallacy is we don't need tools. And this is another one that really confuses me. Just the simple fact of try asking a painter to paint a house with no tools. Paint even, it's not really possible. So that's obvious. Another one that you would have probably heard is there's no such thing as a silver bullet. I kind of question that. I actually think there is such a thing as a silver bullet, but the thing is that it only works on werewolves. What about vampires and zombies? The vampires, you need holy water, you need cross, you need silver, you need sunlight, wouldn't hurt. But for a zombie, really all you need is a baseball bat and maybe a shotgun. So it's really about picking the tool that you need for what type of project or monster that you're dealing with. And we went through a process of choosing our tool set. We come from a test management system called Excel, which when you're dealing with smaller management pieces of work, it's a fantastic tool, don't get me wrong, but when you're dealing with enterprise level projects, the overhead just becomes too much and you spend more time fixing bugs in the test matrix or the admin sheet than actually testing them. So that's on the too little side, as opposed to we're a 10-man team. You don't need enterprise level, don't need to spend $100,000 per person in our environment. So picking the right tool set for us, there was a lot of thought process into it. Now again, this isn't a tool-specific presentation, but just thought I'd throw a few images up on the slide around what some of the tools that we're using are. We are a Microsoft shop, so we're using a Microsoft tool set mostly for our manual testing and our development. And the key thing about that is that the developers are there as well. And I'll talk about that in the process, a bit more on the process section. But we're also very heavy in the open source space as well. So the majority of our automation is in Selenium. We're using behavior-driven development using an open source tool called SpecFlow, which is essentially a .NET version of Cucumber. Using NU framework, virtualization, but also we've got a whole suite of tools that help us do other things like omniture testing. We're using WASP, debugging of traffic movement between servers. We're using a mixture of HTTP, Watch, Fiddler, or Firebug. Simple tools like classification tree editor. We love that tool, which is a great tool for. You've got a huge number of combinations. It uses pairwise testing to really fine-tune your test plan, screenshots, and very importantly, custom test harnesses. So as I said before, working with the developers to get them to help us do our job. But yeah, this is probably only about 3/4 of what we use. Again, it's about picking the right tool for the job. And that's all I'll say about tools. So now on to the meaty bit of the presentation. Hopefully it's the meaty bit. Another Agile fallacy is we don't need planning or documentation. I love this one because it gives me a really good laugh. You've probably seen that Gilbert coming before, but quite obviously that's not right. I mean, when's the last time you tore up a card? Or when's the last time you looked at a wall full of cards? That is documentation. It is different documentation. You're not talking about huge booklets full of requirements. It's more about fine-tuning it and much more efficient documentation. So onto what the testing role is. Before any code we go through what we call inception. There's probably lots of different terms for it depending on your environment. But essentially this was a 2-week session at the beginning of the project. We've got the business representative, we've got the project manager, we've got business analysts, we've got developers, we've got the tester taking the photo. Going into this sprint, you're going with nothing more than a problem statement and maybe some high-level wireframes and an idea. And then the whole team is involved in defining the requirements and writing up at least the initial set of cards and initial estimates. And this is really just the core team is in there for the full 2 weeks, but we also get in performance testers and solution architects and security architects and stuff, and everyone has their say in building up the non-functional requirements as well. Whatever's required for the project. And that's not saying that things won't change when you come out of this room, but it's setting up good foundations, it's making sure everyone's on the same boat. What's the title of that one? So again, talking to the point of everyone has input into the requirements. This is an image of a story workshop. So this could be for a card that's come out of Inception, it could be for a new card. But what we're talking about is whiteboarding a particular scenario and everyone, again, being on the same boat before any code is written. Sometimes there might have been a proof of concept, but the fact is everyone's kind of tearing it apart before any code is written. And so this is essentially the, I guess, the second quality gateway to prevent the type of bugs that come from misunderstanding. And I would like to point out, if you think this is casual, this is actually almost a tuxedo compared to what we usually work with. Is there anyone in the room that hasn't done any Agile before? Are you familiar with the concept of the wall and the swing lanes? Right? So the whole concept is, this is essentially a snapshot of the status of the project. And I just wanted to talk about some of the ceremonies, or the Agile ceremonies that happen and where they happen. So we've got Inception, which kind of happens all the way back here. And that's essentially quality gateway number 1. We've already talked about the story workshop, which we had a screenshot on the slide previously, and that happens before the BA is ready to give it to the devs. That's the second quality gateway. The third quality gateway is story kickoff. So that's where the business analyst has compiled all the questions and answers into user stories and the acceptance criteria, which is coming up. They give it to the dev, and then the dev essentially reads through it and say, this is what I think you're asking for. And again, testing's involved, business representative, sometimes project management is involved there. So that's kind of the flow and quality gateway before development actually begins. And then the devs do their stuff and work their magic. Before they hand over to QA, we've got the story walkthrough. Generally this happens even before checking, sometimes after checking, kind of depending on the type of change. But that's where the dev's driving, this is what you've asked for, this is what I've done. And that's a good place for, again, testing, but more importantly, I guess the first stage of business acceptance testing happens at that stage as well. So it's a perfect place for the product owner to say, actually, I don't like that button up there, can we move it down there? You know, obviously you don't want to change too much at that point. If it's quick, you can do it, but sometimes we get users to move it back to there because, you know, the business owner just didn't like what had been done. No fault to the developer, but when you actually see something, see the finished product, yeah, no, actually I don't like that, we need to change this around that. So that's kind of the fourth quality gateway to, it almost prevents formal change requests coming out as well.
There's much value in, like, in the dev stage. We've been doing a lot recently about trying to actually get the VAs and the testers actually sitting with the devs, and the devs talking to them a lot more during the dev stage before walkthrough. I think there's much value in that.
On a case-by-case scenario, you know, sometimes, well, yes and no. I think it's kind of, when the testers get involved, it's kind of the beginning of the walkthrough. It's kind of an informal walkthrough. Obviously the devs, you know, we do some kind of XP and paired programming in some cases, but more often than not, the devs spend, you know, half a day or a day or however long it takes to do the majority of the work, and then they will call someone in, and if it's like a quite complex UI story, for example, then say get the tester over, give them 5-10 minutes just play at your computer. Some of that. But again, I'd probably look at that as the beginning of the story walkthrough phase, not necessarily the stage. And then we go into the in-test column. The testers work their magic, which is saved up. So they're the basic swim lanes of an Agile role. We've probably got 7 different project streams at Seek, and each and every role is different. The current project one has, I think, 16 different columns, because there's a lot more UX and there's a lot more over this side. There's a lot of analysis that happens over this space before it even goes into development. It's all about having the visibility of the work that's going on. So once we have the user story, it's again we're using the Microsoft toolset. It's put into Team Foundation server, and this is where you can't quite see all the acceptance criteria are down here. We're not actually using that field anymore because we're using spec flow, which I'll talk about in just a second. But this is really just the metadata, and this is what feeds into all the reporting. I might come back to that slide because an interesting one is this one. So this is all our acceptance criteria. This is essentially the result of the story kickoffs and the story walkthroughs. This is what the developers are developing on. This is what the BAs are writing. And this is essentially the first stage of test automation. Now we're still working through it. We've only been doing it for 2 years, which isn't really a long time when you're talking about continuous improvement and just the sheer number of opinions that are out there. But the owner of this would be the business analyst in the beginning, but then the testers would also be updating it to make it more automated. It's all about defining the domain dictionary and making sure that each line is actually unique and fits into automation. So I guess the point is it's a shared ownership. There's no one person who is responsible for it. Pretty basic given when then. Some scenarios can get bigger than others, but the key point is that each one of those steps is an automated test step. Now there was a question in the previous session around, the tester skill set. Should everyone be able to automate? I look at automation in terms of layers. You've got the framework layer, and that really requires someone with pretty heavy dev skills. But then you've got kind of middle layers and this kind of top layer. I don't look at that as automation. Yes, there's some syntax that needs to be learned, but really all it is a binding of a test step of plain English to something in the framework that you don't really need to know what it does. You just need to know that it's there. So I would say that each and every tester should at least be able to get to this stage. Obviously, the more senior testers would kind of work out into actually dealing with Selenium itself or API calls or whatever. But it's all about layers, kind of like ogres. So that's kind of from the wall to an automated test. And I'll probably say 60% of our effort, or the goal is to put 60% of our effort into automation. But there are some things that can't be automated or shouldn't be automated. You could automate something and it'll break 5 minutes later. We're dealing with an environment that has 5 different technology platforms, and I don't know how many services that may or may not be running. So the whole thing about automation is that you should be able to rerun it each and every time, and it should work if it's supposed to work. We're dealing with an environment that you have lots of false positives. If something's taking a bit longer or a service isn't running, that's not a bug, that's just an environment thing. So we cover up what can't be automated with manual testing, but even in the manual testing space, there is a mentality shift. We've moved away from reams of paper and thousands of lines of test code, and we rely more on the tester's domain knowledge and the tester's curiosity. What happens if I click this button? What happens if I do that? You don't need to follow a script to do that. In fact, in a way, it's almost harmful to follow a script because you're not using your head. But because we're in the same tool set, we write our manual tests directly from the user story. It's all linked together. And the contents of our manual tests vary. Most of the time it's very simple, 1 or 2 lines exploration tests around this. Make sure that you check the billing code, make sure you check it's being charged. For more complex scenarios, you can put as much detail in here as you want. I'm frankly too lazy to put any more than it's absolutely needed. Now, another interesting thing is because we're in the same tool, everything is linked together and it's linked together automatically. So again, there was a question around, it might have been another session around traceability from requirements to the measurement of quality. That's almost a full-time job if you have to do it manually. Again, I couldn't bother to do that. So we're trying to work into the process of we can get all of that automatically and the tool set helps us to do that. And I thought I'd throw this one in there because talking to the need for the testers to become a bit more technical or a bit more aware of their environment. Each and every work item, be it a bug or a user story or a test case, if there's code events that will be included, it'll have this integration build. So I know exactly when a developer has checked something against it. I know if I'm testing something that bug hasn't been fixed, I can see which build is being deployed, what am I testing against, and verify it against that field. It hasn't been included yet, I won't throw it back to the dev. But I'd probably say about 40% of test effort would be in the manual exploration testing. Now, kind of summing up most of what I've already talked about, this is kind of a visualization of how everything fits together. The key thing is that everything hangs off the user story. We're moving from a development-driven environment to a requirements-driven environment, and everyone has input into the requirements. We have the devs checking against the user stories, we have the testers running test cases against the user story, bugs are linked to test cases or user stories, etc., etc. And more importantly, we have our automation as well that is linked to the user story. Here I'm referencing Selenium, but again, with any automation framework, you can point to whatever framework you want. And everything's executed via init and stepflow. In terms of who does what, it doesn't really matter. On one of the projects we're dealing with, it's the project manager who's taking ownership of all the metadata and user stories, all the estimates, all the which iteration is something happening in, which leaves the BAs free to focus purely on the requirements. And as I said, not on every project, but on the project that I'm currently on, the BAs are running directly into stepflow, which ties in with testing getting involved just at the Selenium test phase, and that's the non-technical phase of it. And then we have the Selenium framework. And that could be QA, or it could be kind of a specialized automation role, full-time automation role. Obviously, they're taking care of their tasks, and QA taking care of the defect management and the manual test case. But what you can't quite read down the bottom is that this kind of change would be a bit too much for one person to put in place, but it's easy when the whole team pitches in. Now on the reporting side, just a couple of metrics. I won't go through all the metrics because that's a whole session on its own. But because everything's in the same tool, we've got this end-to-end traceability. List of requirements, the estimates, the number of story points, the number of test points, and the current status of it, and the number of bugs assigned to it. That's slightly customized, but pretty close to straight out of the box with Microsoft Implementation Zone. Another graph is around the test execution status. So this is more from a test management point of view. I don't think the project manager would be too interested in it, but you can really see the progress of planned test cases versus executed. One of the key differences to point out on this one is, I've mentioned the phrase before, just-in-time test planning. The whole concept of no longer planning 6 months in advance, and then more often than not, things will have changed by the time you actually get to test it. We're dealing, I'd say we do 2-week iterations or 2-week sprints, and you're only planning for the user stories coming into that iteration. So you can see the grey area, which is untested, and never gets too far away from what's actually executed. So to Mark's question before around where is the waste, that's where we came from up the top. You often get 2 or 3 months of doing nothing. We have, exactly as a percentage, probably about 20,000 verification points, and we don't really start getting through them until the end of the project. And that's because of the us versus them mentality between devs and QA. Now, in a way, a small bit of me kind of misses the old days of having 2 or 3 months of doing nothing, would just be the laziness in you. But when you even out the load, quite frankly, I'd rather be working in that. And then on the automation front, again, at the click of a button, you get a report like this, you get a list of the requirements and user stories and the current status of them. So, because I've said 60% of effort in automation, 40% in manual, this should all be automated. You shouldn't have to spend much time at all in reporting. Maybe a bit of time up front to customize the reporting for the audience that you want, and maybe a little bit of overhead in maintaining the data in the system, because obviously metrics are only as accurate as the data in the system. But all of this should be at the click of a button, and anyone should be able to do it. So that's on the reporting side. How are we doing with time? I'll step through it. So just in summary, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I've really only talked from a testing point of view, haven't talked about environment management, haven't talked about some of the cool stuff the devs are doing, or environment management or any of that. But the bottom line is testers need to increase their skills, not just are, but need to increase their skills. And it's really affected our hiring process and across the board, again, not just in testing, project management as well. Six never had really an issue with people saying we don't need testers, but we have been the bottleneck in the past. And we've always been blamed, why wasn't this tested, why is it taking so long? Now, because we're an integral part of the team, we don't have that problem anymore. It's fantastic. Now everyone gets blamed. It's great. But no, testing is, now acknowledged, more acknowledged than before, a very important part of the team. As I said before, because we have the cross-platform knowledge of the system, how everything ties together. Next one is testers and BAs. In fact, requirements are now driving the development. It's no longer here's a requirement, throw it over the fence. A couple of months later, the devs do what they do in their dark cave, and then what comes out is often quite different from what we expected. Now it's the requirements that are driving the and because of the wall, there's no hidden effort. Because of the wall and because of automatic reporting, there's no hidden effort across the whole project. In our daily standards, we walk through the wall. If you're talking about something that's not on the wall, what are you working on? It really helps to make sure that everyone's working towards the quality of the project, delivering the quality of the project. Because we're not planning too far ahead, we can easily respond to change. Now that, again, is kind of a cliche of Agile and across the development space, but it's equally as important from a testing point of view. We no longer have to plan 6 months, 2 months in advance. We're dealing with it as it comes through, just in time. A very important thing is testers determining our own tool set. We're not driven by the development team. If we need something, we can implement it. We have that freedom. In a way, we actually have more freedom than the developers. The developers still need to maintain the website or the product. What we're doing doesn't affect the product, so we have more freedom to actually try new things. And if it doesn't work, we can leave it aside and try something new. And another cliche, it's a continuously improved process. Every day learning something new, every project is different. So back to the silver bullet thing, I can work out something that's perfect for this project and this team. Do with this team on this project, it doesn't work. So responding to change and continuously improving. And as I said, we've only been doing it for almost 2 years, and I still feel like the journey's just begun. Talking to some Agile practitioners that have been dealing with 4 or 5 years, and they're still going through this, might have strong opinions, but there's always that continuous improvement mentality. And that's it for me. Any questions?
Yeah, how are you dealing with some of the other non-functional testing, say for example security testing within those user stories?
So they're not directly in the user stories, so taking security testing as an example, we have the security architect regularly reviewing not so much the user stories but the products. We have the showcases at the end of each iteration, which they'll come along to, and they'll usually come directly to the testing team. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And the other thing on the security side is when we get a package that's kind of ready to be analysed, we'll send it to the security team and they'll run their tools and stuff for code analysis and send us back a report. So they're not, as I said, part of the core team, but they're definitely involved in the progress. Another example is on the performance testing side of things. We're working towards bringing the performance as far forward as possible. Traditionally performance is when you've got a release candidate, which is kind of too late to fix any problems if you find any. Each time, because we're dealing kind of functional silos or functional streams, each time, for example, posting the job ad is finished, we send that off and they can script the performance testing of the function job of posting the job ad. It's split up that way. So again, it's not tied directly to user stories or the requirements, dealing more with functional areas. Anything else? Very silent, right?
So, well, did you find that people had to, like some testers didn't make that transition and decided to move out? Or
not as many as you might think. We did have a few people leave, but that wasn't because of the transition to Agile.
yeah,
You don't need to be Agile or don't need to move to Agile to increase your skill set. So the people that left probably weren't happy in the previous role anyway.
yeah,
In fact, if they had stuck around and for when we became Agile, they might have stayed.
yeah, yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you very much. What time was the break?
I think it's 10:45, so you're right on
Perfect
time.
time.
Excellent. Thanks, Rob.
If you have any questions that you haven't thought of, feel free to contact me, email address or Twitter. More than happy to share my opinion and to accept criticism as long as it's good.